Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. I'm in my mobile studio today. I got a little work going on at my house with my internet, but what hasn't changed is the fact that Awesome, know him as Austin. Awesome Ward joins me yet again on the Tim May Podcast. Awesome, welcome. How you doing today, my man?
Great. It's a new day, a new week. Just excited to talk only about Maryland and never about Rutgers again. Oh, I'm sure that we'll actually have to do that. My bad.
No, not really. I mean, I'm telling you, the third quarter did not go down well with Ryan Day when he was watching video yesterday. I'm just leaving it at that, and with the Ohio State offensive line coach, Greg Studraw, I'm sure he had some problems with some of the things he saw, and defensively, they definitely did. When you get outgained like Ohio State did in the third quarter and then the second half, really, that's something you can gives you a little bit of a whip going into the next game. 49-27, though, still told the tale, maybe not the true tale, but told the tale of that game. Agreed?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not the true tale. I think, want to be critical of the second half, that's fine. You could also look at 35-3 in the first half and just close the chapter on it. I mean, it's all a matter of perspective. If Ryan Day wants a teaching point, he can look at the second half. If he wants to, look at all the other factors that contributed maybe to the malaise and when they, start the fourth quarter and they think the game's over and just try to run out the clock and Rutgers wasn't having it, then they can focus on that. That's why the beauty of what we do, what the coaches do, we can make whatever we want of it. And for me, I don't really see anything that happened after halftime as that informative about the potential.
Yeah, I know, but then the only thing I'd say about that argument is the fact that when Ohio State has trailed many times after the first half in certain games, and they came back and have a strong second half, you don't just throw the first half away, and you don't just throw the second half away. It's a 60-minute game, is all I was saying. And what troubled me was Ohio State had a chance to really just come and and put the hammer down in the third quarter, got the ball first, and didn't get it done. And that was what it was. I mean, yeah, the game was already put away, 35-3. That drive just before halftime, it was what it was. I agree with that. But let's just move on from there.
Let's do it.
Bottom line is Ohio State takes on the one of the two red hot teams in the Big Ten this week, a game at Maryland. We're going to get back when I get back from my guest here in a minute. We're going to talk about that. But it is interesting. Like I said on Saturday night, with the exception of Ohio State, the Big Ten East is upside down. Agreed?
Yeah, it's absolutely bizarre, Tim.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take Bill Bender of the Sporting News, one of my favorite guests I have on here from time to time, because he lives locally in the Central Ohio area in Pickerington, as he will brag about more often than not. But he has an interesting take on the Big Ten scene and the national scene, where Ohio State kind of fits, what the top four should be right now in his mind is, if you're on the college football playoff committee, and a few other observations. And when we're done with that, Awesome, we'll be back, and you and I are going to chop it up about Ohio State and the Big Ten from here on out. And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back with one of my best buddies, Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Bill, welcome once again to the Tim May Podcast.
Tim, thanks for having me on. How you doing?
Pretty good, man. I mean, I love college football in the fall, and suddenly every conference was suddenly playing this past weekend. What'd you think about that? I mean, slowly but surely, college football is back to its full strength. What's your take?
Well, I mean, you look at last year, and Facebook has these memories, and then you realize, well, I was at this game, and the playoff race was here last year, and now it almost feels like, Tim, Saturday was kind of the beginning to me in some ways. Everybody was out there. You had two top 10 showdowns that really impacted the picture. Ohio State's the Big Ten's 3 weeks in. Still a lot of question marks about the conference as a whole. But, no, it was a fun weekend. And I think we've got 2 weeks till the first playoff rankings are released. But that playoff picture, to me, is starting to really form.
Yeah. And give it to me in a nut. You and I were talking before we started here. And, I'm not discounting Oregon, even though it just got started, because – teams are obviously, we know Notre Dame and Clemson are probably going to play again, for example. And the Southeastern Conference is going to be whatever it turns out to be. Florida coming on. But what is your what is your just sort of take on a top four? If you had a top four right now and you were on the college football playoff committee, what would it be?
Well, my first sports editor was a guy named Aaron Cordy, and he always liked to say, if the season ended today, we'd all be surprised. Now, in 2020,
That's
I
good.
might not be surprised, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
but if I had a top four today, it would go something like this. It would be Alabama and Ohio State 1 or 2. You can put either one at 1. I don't care. I mean, they're going to argue about that. Alabama's played more games, so they'd probably be 1. Ohio State 2. I would put Notre Dame 3. So I'd get Ohio State Notre Dame Rose Bowl. I think some people might watch that. And then I have Oregon 4 for now, and that leaves Clemson out. But I think we all understand where Clemson can get back in. Trevor Lawrence back on the field. They go beat Notre Dame. Then it spices up that playoff race a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, though, what's been revealed to me the last 2 weeks, everybody's talking about Trevor Lawrence this, Trevor Lawrence that. Boston College offensively drove the ball on those guys repeatedly and couldn't hang on at the end, and had a really wacky play in the end zone, which kind of really flipped that game. But Boston College, which is not known for big time offense going into that game, but especially going against Clemson's, star-studded defense. I'm talking about from a 4- and 5-star rated thing. And then the same thing on Saturday at Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame, scored points on Clemson, whether Trevor Lawrence is on the field or not. I don't think would have made that big a difference in that regard. Clemson might have scored a few more touchdowns, who knows, but that to me has been the big reveal about the Trevor Lawrence missing question mark, is the fact that this is not the Clemson defense of even last year. You agree with me on that, don't you?
They have young talent, but it may not be there yet.
Yeah.
Some of those 5-star freshmen on the defensive line are really good. But in some other programs, they may not play as a freshman. Zach Harrison didn't play much as a freshman at Ohio State. So I think sometimes that's a difference. You need a year to get in there and show that talent. The biggest thing Saturday that stuck out to me, and it would apply to Michigan, Indiana, it would apply to Clemson, Notre Dame. It's the first thing I watch when I watch a football game. I guess I'm old, but Clemson couldn't run the ball.
Yeah.
Couldn't run the ball. Notre Dame stopped their run, and against the freshman quarterback, he played great. DJ Uiagalelei, it's as close as I'm going to get. He played great, but
exactly.
Couldn't run the ball.
Yeah.
Michigan couldn't run the ball against Indiana. It's not when you have a young quarterback and you can't run the ball, it's not real mystery what's going to happen in the game.
Yeah, and if you watch the defensive calls in those games, though, both of those defenses, Notre Dame and Indiana, were bound and determined that they were going to get beat by the pass. If you follow, and that, enough football to know that, and then, Michigan could not get it done, and in the final analysis, Clemson couldn't get it done. Went to overtime. They gave up the big drive at the end that allowed Notre Dame to score, and that's what I'm saying. That's what's troubling. If you're a Clemson fan or, a Clemson backer, that's what's troubling to me is you had a chance to win it in regulation. You couldn't stop a desperation touchdown drive. So, yeah, I mean, I had the same takeaway as you did. You got to run the ball somehow, some way. But let's just jump right into it.
Well, Tim, let me ask you a question, because you've done this a lot longer than me. So you look at Notre Dame and you look at Michigan, and they're kind of the other programs in the Midwest that we talk about the most other than Ohio State.
Yes.
Notre Dame looked to me like one of those classic Lou Holtz teams on Saturday. Stop the run, solid. There's no guy on Notre Dame's team where you're like, that guy is unbelievable.
Right.
But they played well together as a team. And Michigan, who beat these guys soundly last year, has trended in the other direction really quickly. So that's probably been the most staggering development to me, is that Notre Dame really has ascended to what I believe. I don't know if they can win a national title with that team, but I think they're good enough to make the playoff.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
And I think they're a team that could, if they played Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and we played it out, it would probably play out like their last couple meetings, where Ohio State's the more talented team, probably going to win the game. But that does not take away from what Brian Kelly's done there. I think he's done a tremendous coaching job since they've lost the semifinal to Clemson. They showed that they can play with a heavyweight.
Yeah, I agree. Let's just jump right into this. You kind of gave me your national picture there. Let's throw one other thing in there before we move on to the Big Ten, which is as I said on Saturday, except for Ohio State, the Big Ten went upside down on Saturday. The Big Ten East, without a doubt. But Brigham Young, UC, Cincinnati, do they have a shot in your mind of stealing that stealing's not the right word, coming in the back door into that fourth spot in the college football playoff if either or goes undefeated? I mean, let me interrupt. Let me have this rejoinder. You've got to give it up to BYU. This may be its best offense ever from just an over the top standpoint. And that's saying something. And then UC is solid on both sides of the ball and occasionally spectacular offensively. Now go ahead.
I think this is a weird way to answer your question. I think if BYU and Cincinnati played, that BYU would win because of the quarterback, because of the offense, because they're solid on both sides of the ball. But I think Cincinnati has a better chance of making the playoff because of their schedule, because they beat some ranked teams, because Luke Fickell's done a fantastic job with that defense, the running game, Desmond Ridder. I think Cincinnati has a chance too. I don't know if BYU's schedule is going to be enough. And then, so if you look at their rooting guide, if you're a Cincinnati fan, here's what you need to happen. You need Oregon to lose. You need the Big 12 to continue to be terrible. So that then you have two conferences out. You need, you kind of needed Clemson to beat Notre Dame on Saturday, because where it's going to get dicey there is if Clemson beats Notre Dame in the rematch, but it's another classic game. I think they're going to put both teams in. So your final playoff, in my opinion, is probably going to be Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Notre Dame, if Clemson beats them. And that's going to leave Cincinnati out with one loss. So you need Boston College to go beat Notre Dame this weekend to make that an elimination game.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm just saying, there's something about that Boston College team in the first year under Jeff Hafley, who a year ago was Ohio State's defensive co-coordinator, that is intriguing to me. And of course, one thing you left out of that, what if Florida beats Alabama in the SEC championship game? Then what happens?
Then it's even more messy, because I think you've got to cut some teams out then, and then they could fall back on the conference championship matters. So Florida would get in, maybe Alabama would get left out in the cold. That, Tim, is going to shake out to be a much more interesting game than I thought it would be 2 weeks ago.
Agreed.
Because of Kyle Trask and the way that their offense is great. Florida's defense is bad though. So I don't know if Florida has enough to beat Alabama, but man, they had enough to beat Georgia on Saturday.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That was crazy how that game just kind of got away from Georgia, kind of like the Alabama game. When you look back on it, I mean, the Georgia quarterback Stetson, what's his last name? Stetson Bennett. Yeah. Stetson Bennett, man, he may be out over his skis. I mean, I think Georgia is looking at some things right there. But the bottom line is, you're right. I mean, I just think the SEC is interesting, but this is not like you and I talked about when you were on the show several weeks ago. This is not your older cousin's Alabama defense either, So, it's an intriguing year. Let's just jump. Speaking of intriguing, Big Ten. Saturday was about as interesting as it gets. It reminds me of 1984, going into I think the next to last weekend of the season. Ohio State had already had 2 losses at Purdue and at Wisconsin, and needed things to happen. You know what I mean? I called it this big wind of upset swept through the Big Ten on that next to last weekend or whenever it was, and suddenly Ohio State was in position to win the Big Ten outright with 2 losses. It beats Michigan. Keith Byers wearing that big wrap on his leg, and boom, Ohio State became and still is the only team ever to win the Big Ten outright with 2 losses in the league. And this Saturday had kind of that same feel about it, because Indiana, did Indiana upset Michigan? I know Michigan was favored, but was that an upset as you looked at it? And then definitely Maryland over Penn State. Maybe you saw that coming, but you didn't see it coming like it came, like it finally got there. But just what were your takes on those 2 games, man, and just how it kind of definitely reset things in the Big Ten East?
Well, what I did see coming, maybe not to the extent they did it, was Iowa beating Michigan State. That's just predictable. Michigan State coming off a big win against Michigan, turns around, can't play. against the Hawkeyes. Maryland, no, I did not see that coming at all. Their offense is pretty good. They're getting up and down with that offense. Mike Loxley's recruited well, as you guys know, covering
Yeah.
Ohio State. They've pulled good players out of that area of the country. Dwayne
Plus,
Haskins.
they got a quarterback. They got a Tagovailoa quarterback. Tagovailoa, and he looked like his brother Saturday. Go ahead.
He's playing well, and they, Ohio State's got guys like Dwayne Haskins and Chase Young from that part of the country. If Mike Loxley can recruit there, that might go for a while. Michigan, I thought, would win Saturday. I honestly thought, when you haven't lost to a team since 1987, you're coming off a loss. Thought they were the more talented team. What was startling about that is I was watching that game, Tim. I thought to myself, they're not the more talented team. They don't have the better scheme. They don't have the better coaching. And it's wild that Nick Sheridan, who was a Michigan, he started against Ohio State, I think, in Rich Rod's first year against Ohio State in one of those bloodbaths.
I think you're right.
Who would have thought that Nick Sheridan's offense was going to look that much better than what Michigan had? And I think it's going to bring up the question now, and you can ask me if you want. I was like, do they get rid of Harbaugh? I don't know. I don't think they fire him. If he decides to leave and they do the mutual parting ways, wouldn't surprise me. The contract runs through next year. You could chalk up this season to COVID. But they don't look anywhere near a Big Ten contender, in my opinion. If you took the wings off the helmets, you're looking at Iowa or maybe even Purdue at this point.
Let me flip it to you. If Indiana had come out in Michigan's uniforms and Michigan come out in Indiana's uniforms, you wouldn't have been surprised by how the game turned out. You follow my drift? I am with you.
Yeah.
I thought Indiana, just as a group, had better skill position players on both sides of the ball. You had wide receivers making plays. You had a quarterback throwing the ball through tiny windows. Michael Penix Jr., since that last drive in regulation against Penn State, has been a different quarterback. He's got confidence. He seems to know what he's looking at when he looks at the defense, and he's got wide receivers. Yeah, they had a few drops on Saturday, or it might have been worse, as far as the Michigan point of view was looking at it. But I'm incredibly impressed by Indiana, and that's, it's like I said, everything got flipped upside down except for Ohio State on Saturday. And even in the second half of that game, Ohio State left a lot to be desired against Rutgers, but they were up 35-3. But what I'm getting to, this has made the game with Indiana coming up maybe the showdown game in the Big Ten East. And who had that on their board 5-6 weeks ago?
Top 10 showdown. You're gonna have Indiana top 10 team probably at that point if they handle success. Northwestern is the other surprise after how bad they were last year. They get an Indiana quarterback, of course.
Indiana breeds championships.
Right. And they're probably, depending on what happens with Wisconsin, they might be the best bet to go to the Big Ten championship again. So, that's the road Ohio State's going to have to face. I think the Buckeyes' biggest challenge is guarding against complacency. Maybe there was a little bit of that in the second half against Rutgers. Maybe, Ryan's got to keep them. They're going to be favored by absurd margins the rest of the way. And the Michigan margin will probably even be 15, 16. That's just guessing now.
It might be higher than that, my friend.
I mean 20.
I'm serious.
It could be 20. And that's not saying that lightly. I think they've got to guard against that complacency. Indiana's definitely been the best story in the Big Ten. When I look at those streaks, and I know, like I said, you've been around this a little bit longer. I remember Anthony Thompson. I was 9 years old. So, when they're bringing back that era of Indiana football where they were actually competing for the Rose Bowl, it's a pretty impressive job by Tom Allen.
Yeah. Bill Mallory, shades of Bill Mallory. They showed shots of retrospective shots of Indiana from back in the 80s and 90s the other day, and especially the 80s, like you said, 87. They beat Ohio State and Michigan that year. And as you're not old enough to remember this, but Earl Bruce called that loss to Indiana in Ohio Stadium. We're sitting there in the post-game press conference. He said it was the darkest day in Ohio State football history. And he had a few more dark days to come that season before he was summarily fired with a week to go, and ends up pulling off the upset against Michigan. But my point was, Indiana beat Ohio State 2 years in a row, 87 and 88. And I remember writing after the loss, Ohio State's loss at Indiana, where Indiana could almost named its score, a new day has dawned in the Big Ten. I mean, because it just felt like it. Ohio State seemed so far away, kind of like what Michigan looked like a little bit on Saturday, but nobody saw that coming with Michigan. With John Cooper's first year in '88, Ohio State had a lot of rebuilding to do. But this is the 6th year of the Jim Harbaugh era. And, I'm just thinking maybe the happiest guy in the Big Ten to see Michigan lose on Saturday was probably James Franklin, because Penn State's sitting there 0-3, but everybody's talking about Michigan being 1-2. What do you think?
It's because Michigan is who gets more headlines than Penn State.
Yeah.
I mean, Jim still has a winning record against James Franklin. That easily gets forgotten. So the biggest thing I was seeing on my timeline is if you play it out. So, okay, let's say Harbaugh leaves and goes and coaches the Texans or the whoever, some bad NFL team that's willing to take that on. Who really wants that job? Who can take that job? Who wants that job? Do they do the Ohio State thing? And the two names that are going to get thrown out there would be Luke Fickell. I don't think it would happen. I think what he has at Cincinnati is pretty special. He's a Columbus kid. He's a DeSales kid. And it may not happen for a long time. I always thought if Luke Fickell was going to go next level, that job would be Notre Dame because of some of those Catholic ties, Then you start to think, okay, who else has Ohio State ties that Michigan may actually entertain? And Jeff Hafley would be interesting.
Yeah.
Because then you'd have a modern, he has good ties with Ryan Day. He's a good coach. I think he's a rising star. You probably do too. I mean, we saw it last year with what he did with the defense, and you're kind of seeing it with BC. But you'd be taking a risk there. And then the other one's Matt Campbell, a Mount Union guy. Done a fantastic job at Iowa State. Was a guy that Ohio State fans, for the 2.5 hours that Urban Meyer was not the coach, thought that it might be him if it wasn't going to be Ryan Day. So those are really it. And do you really think one of those three guys wants that job? It's not would they do better than Harbaugh. I actually think all three of those guys might do better long term. It's a question of, do they want that job?
Well, here's the thing. Michigan, this is what I always tell people, when you think about this can't happen because of this, Gary Moeller was an Ohio State captain. He was an Ohio State guy. Bo Schembechler was an assistant coach with Woody Hayes. He'd never been a Michigan man until he got hired to be the Michigan head coach. This idea you got to be a Michigan man, I think, has been blown out of the water now. Like I said, Gary Moeller, he had his problems that got him canned up there, but he was fairly effective as a Michigan coach. You got to say that much. The interesting thing, like I said, these tradition-rich blue blood program jobs don't come open very often, and you can't necessarily and I'm not saying Luke Fickell is even contemplating this, but if a Michigan comes calling, you've got to listen. I mean, because Ryan Day, he could be at Ohio State for another, people keep thinking he might end up maybe pursuing an NFL job down the line. We'll see if that happens. I don't get that feel from him at all at this moment. But you can spend your whole lifetime waiting for your dream job to come open, and then when it does, you have a 5-7 record that year, and you don't get it. You understand what I'm saying? So I think all those cards are on the table. Another name I would throw in there, and you might laugh and others might laugh, is PJ Fleck. I think PJ Fleck showed what he could do at Western Michigan. Yes, he's had a rough start to this year, but last year he showed it, and you give him a little bit of a current with that row the boat aspect going, and he can make things happen. I mean, some people, are a little bit turned off by his quote personality. I like it because I think he's legit. I mean, I think he is serious to the bone about winning football games and recruiting. And that's where Michigan, like I just go back to what we talked about a while ago when I told you, I thought Indiana as a group had the better skill position players on Saturday. That makes no sense. That makes no sense to me. But it does if you've really looked at things. And so I wouldn't rule any of those guys out, including Matt Campbell. How could Matt Campbell, as much as he's shown his his allegiance to his players and people at Iowa State, how could he not at least contemplate the Michigan job? I mean, so I think those cards are on the table because Michigan, if indeed they make a move, which isn't certified it's going to happen, you got to look at guys who've gotten it done and maybe tougher situations than what Harbaugh faced.
Yeah, and I mean Harbaugh, when he leaves, I think there is no doubt he's improved the program, in my opinion. I mean, where they were at the end of Brady Hoke era, it was Michigan football was unrecognizable.
Yeah.
The Rich Rod thing, I'm starting to rethink a little bit because I almost think they hired him too soon. It's weird, like because it didn't work. Yeah, the Michigan man was the thing there, but they did put up offensive numbers. They just couldn't stop anybody then. And
you know what it reminded me when Nebraska got rid of Frank Solich and they wouldn't hired Bill Callahan because they wanted this professional pro offense, blah, blah, blah. And really, they've been paying the price ever since then. Yeah, they got to a Big Ten championship game under Bo Pelini and stuff, but they've been really paying the price to get back to to relevance, or consistent relevance ever since then. Agreed?
Oh, for sure. And again, I mean, that's what the scheme changes. And now they bring Scott Frost back and they're starting to say, well, he's not getting it done. Well,
yeah,
he kind of inherited the same thing Harbaugh did. And I think it's harder to build at Nebraska than it is at Michigan, at least in the Big Ten. So, Michigan's they haven't, in my opinion, they really haven't been the same since 2016 in the spot. That was the last time, and I've been in the box for I've been in the box for the last 5. 16 was the only time that I truly felt that Michigan might have the better team, at least because of their defensive line. The one thing they didn't have, though, was the better quarterback. They had Wilton Speight, right? And I remember walking up in the elevator with you in 18, and that was when Michigan was doing the revenge tour, and they had a lot of momentum. They were big favorites in that game. And you said something like, it might be close, hinting that Ohio State was going to win big. And I was thinking, Tim's right. Yeah, I mean, they just had the better team. And then it showed up like first drive when Haskins took it down. I said, well, this game's going to be bad. I didn't think it would be that bad. But and that's on Michigan to respond. I mean, Ohio State doesn't have to wait for them to do that. And it's going to take I'm fairly certain Harbaugh's not the guy. I just don't know who is. I mean, that's the really hard question.
Yeah. Well, that's for an AD, man. I mean, you know what? You may think you hire the right guy, but it takes 3 years to find out if you did. And that's the dice you roll, when you're in that position. And Ohio State has got it going on so tremendously from a recruiting standpoint, and then the product they're putting on the field now, which is very attractive to big time skill players, as you well know. That is definitely a project they've got going up there. But what really stands out, and I'm not knocking this guy because everybody's got their own way of doing things, but I think the Don Brown defensive genius story has run its course because, I'm like I tweeted on Saturday, if Ohio State doesn't throw the ball 45 times minimum, weather permitting, on December the 12th, you know what I mean? In Ohio Stadium, then there ought to be an inquest because they're just inviting you to throw the ball on them just repeatedly. And that's what really is stunning. Like you said, running game and defense are what you usually build championship programs on. And then when you get a big time passing game like Ohio State has now you really got something going for you, just like Alabama does with Najee Harris as a running back, but then Mac Jones. And they lost a Waddle, but they've still got a really good fleet of wide receivers. This is even with Waddle missing, this still has a chance to maybe be the most prolific, maybe not the right word, scary offense Alabama has ever put on the field. And I've been watching them since 1961, so you got to play offense, in modern college football. You got to be able to play offense. And, but defensively, you got to be able to stop some people every now and then. That's what really jumps out at me.
Yeah. I mean, the Don Brown thing, if you're going to play that style of defense, you have to have two things happen. You have to have a pass rush that lands on the quarterback. It doesn't.
Yes.
And they just lost Aiden Hutchinson.
Yes.
And you have to have corners that can play press coverage. they don't currently have that. Maybe Don Brown could run that scheme at Ohio State where you have good elite corners and a good deep pass rush. Michigan doesn't
Yeah.
have it. The last time they had that, and I keep circling back to it, was 16 when they had their defensive line. You go back and look at it, like Taco Charlton's a good NFL player. Pickerington kid too, of course.
Yes.
I had to get a Pickerington.
I know,
drop
man. I knew you'd get to there.
I got a Pickerington drop in because they, by the way, they are playing in the state championship game this week.
I knew you dropped that in too. I knew it, and it was good.
I had to get there at some point.
I was going to bring it up, but go ahead.
Yeah. But they had guys like Chris Wormley. They had guys like Winovich and Rashawn Gary. They were guys that could get after the quarterback, and they don't have that now, and they don't have corners that can play press coverage. Their stubbornness is going to be their undoing. I think that stubbornness on both sides, maybe not offense. They've tried to do things differently, but I mean, Joe Milton isn't seeing the field like, and that, you know what, he's played in 3 games, so you can't
right.
But, you know, if you can't run the ball and you have a quarterback that hasn't played a lot of football, that's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, just look at the 4 teams right now that we're talking about college football playoff. They've all got veteran quarterbacks. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is coming back, you know, and Mac Jones, not a veteran, but he's an older guy who's been in the program. We played a lot last year when Tua got hurt, you know, and then of course Ohio State, Justin Fields, Ian Book at Notre Dame, you know, Zach Wilson out at BYU, the kid at UC. I mean, this is a season when I think veteran or at least older quarterbacks are kind of showing the way, if you follow my drift, because this is a weird season, no matter how you cut it up because of the COVID-19 thing. And that's why, you know, like you said, having a first year starting quarterback, it's kind of a tough road to hoe because 8 games go mighty fast. Agreed?
Oh, for sure. And again, you know, as we get into this playoff race, and I'm putting up our bowl projections as soon as we get off the phone, I mean, to me, it's just right now, it's the pressure's on Oregon. They go undefeated. And then go Ohio State and Alabama. I mean, I hate to put the cart before the horse, but I don't see either one of those teams losing at least in their conference. And then it's going to be a question of Clemson with Lawrence against Notre Dame. And I always tell people there are 2 simple rules for getting it. Well, 3 simple rules for getting in the college football playoff. And the first one's kind of tough and snobby. It's be from a Power 5 conference. 2, go undefeated. That's you do those 2 things, you're in.
You're in.
3 is don't lose twice.
Yeah.
The 1-loss mess is where, you know, Ohio State's been on both sides of that with the 1-loss part. You know, the one with Alabama, the one with, you know, getting in over Penn State. The reason why Penn State didn't get in the playoffs that year is they lost 2 games.
Yeah.
And the committee can say, oh, well, when they put a 2-loss team in over a 1-loss team, let me know. So I think those are – so the big question becomes, what do you do with Notre Dame and Clemson? And the perception, the score will matter. I will say this, and I said it Saturday night as well, and it's a lot of Catholic school talking here, and every time number 1 goes to Notre Dame, it produces an amazing game. And it did Saturday. That was an amazing game. I wonder how loud it would have been had it been a full stadium. Obviously, a lot got written about them storming the field. And Tim, if I hate to say this because it's probably irresponsible, but if I was a college kid, I probably would have done the same thing. And that doesn't make it right. I'm just telling you what was probably the thought process of a lot of those kids.
Yeah. Excitement is excitement, you know?
Right.
And it was just I mean, you wouldn't recommend it necessarily the way things are going right now, but, you know, sometimes you can't hold the horses back if you follow my drift. Like we got 3 horses, believe me. One of them ran over me the other day. So sometimes it happens. Hey, Bill Bender, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast again, my friend. Well, I might have you on later in the season too, when these things start to really kind of filter out, but you always give me that national perspective, which I appreciate.
No, thanks for having me on, Tim. You guys are great to me. Hopefully we can meet in the press box here soon, and check us out at sportingnews.com. We'll have plenty of coverage going the rest of the year.
And by the way, real quick, give people a taste, because this is coming out, dropping on Tuesday. We're talking on a Monday. Where do you have Ohio State going to a bowl? What bowl's Ohio State going to?
I still have them in the Rose Bowl. I have them in the playoff, playing against Notre Dame, and then Oregon and Alabama in the playoff for now.
Hey, well, let me interrupt you. Don't you think Don't you think Ohio State, if it gets to the playoff, it's going to the Rose Bowl, whether it's the 1, 2, or 3 seed? I mean, that's the way I'm sort of looking at that, because I think they see the Rose Bowl as Ohio State's home bowl game, even though it's 3,000 miles from where we're sitting.
Right. Well,
But
the reason why Ohio State will go to the Rose Bowl 1, 2, or 3, if they're 1, they're going to the Rose Bowl because that's where the Big Ten team goes. If they're 2 or 3, that would mean that probably Alabama or Clemson is 1, probably,
yes,
and they'll protect Alabama by putting them in the Sugar Bowl, right? So
right.
it's yeah. So I mean, Pasadena, after all, 2020. That's that'll make us all feel normal if the Buckeyes end up there.
Yeah, San Gabriel Mountains, baby, sunset. Hey, Bill Bender, thanks for joining the 10-May podcast, man. We'll catch you on the flip flop.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, it's always a pleasure for me having Bill Bender on, man. He's one of those soft-spoken, down-to-earth kind of dudes, Midwest kind of dudes, who kind of tells it like it is. And, we were talking about Jim Harbaugh and the situation he's in up there now, and awesome. I know you picked up on some of that, but like he says, if something happens to Jim Harbaugh, who does Michigan go and get, or who wants that job? And I reminded him, well, Michigan's a blue blood program. Just when you think a guy doesn't want it, I reminded him Gary Moeller was a captain at Ohio State, played at Ohio State. He took the job. Bo Schembechler had never been there. And then he defined in his own way what a Michigan man was just by being the coach there. There are people who would line up to have a shot at the Michigan job if it did come open, correct?
Yeah, and I think that, some of those hints that you sprinkled in there, I don't believe that the coach at Cincinnati would be one of those people to jump at that particular job. That's my personal opinion, and from my years of being around him. Your other point is correct. They're going to be able to pick from almost anybody they want elsewhere. I think the hatred of and the rivalry is so ingrained in Luke Fickell, and I know that you talked about the other people in the past. Like, that's just been his entire life, hating that team. And I think when Luke Fickell leaves Cincinnati, it would be basically any other job. But I think he'll be pretty picky about the cream of the crop that arise. But Matt Campbell, to me, seems like the most obvious fit for Michigan. Now, it'll be interesting to see if they recognize that the marketplace could change. If Texas wants to do something, if USC wants to do something, then maybe it's advantageous for them to agree that it's time to part ways so they can actually be involved in the coaching market. That's maybe getting ahead of things a couple weeks, but I think the overall point is that it is very clear to both Jim Harbaugh and Michigan that this is not going to work out the way that they envisioned.
Yeah. I mean, you haven't played for a Big Ten championship yet,
And
you haven't even won the Big Ten East.
No, and they won't this year.
Yeah. Let's jump right into the Big Ten East.
All right.
Penn State's on the bottom of the Big Ten East.
Wow.
Michigan's right above them, standing on Penn State's back. We'll see how that game goes, right?
Yeah.
Dude, it's Ohio State and Indiana neck and neck, showdown coming. And then you got Maryland under Mike Loxley, the talented head coach of Maryland. You got to admit he is a hell of a recruiter, hell of a transfer portal welcoming dude. Talia Tagovailoa. I mean, he looked like his brother, maybe even better on Saturday when they, especially in that first half with that Raheem Jarrett, that sensational freshman they've got. He had what I think Maryland's 5 touchdowns were all by 35 yards or 30 yards or 35 yards or longer plays against Penn State's defense. So the big play capability is there. We've seen Ohio State be a little suspect from time to time in the secondaries the last couple of games. We'll see how that goes. But you got to give it up to Loxley. I know you're not a big fan of Mike Loxley, but you got to give it up to the fact that they're 2-1 and by hook or crook they've gotten there.
I think this week I'm going to swallow my pride and eat a little crow after what Rutgers did, and I'm going to cool it on some of the hyperbole about the opponent. And I'll give him credit for this. The fact that they're 2-1, in no way did I think that was possible. I watched the entirety. Berm and I were on the road watching the Minnesota-Maryland game, and I saw a lot of flaws still popping up in that team, and yet, they didn't give up, and they, as you referenced with the way they beat Penn State, hit some big plays. Raheem Jarrett, Tagovailoa, they can throw it. They're at 276 passing yards a game. I made sure to check on that this morning to get ready for this week because we're going to be talking about that Ohio State secondary a lot.
Yeah.
So he's doing some things offensively, and he landed a 5-star receiver, and that kid is showing it why he was so coveted by Ohio State and everybody else around the country. He's a tremendous wide receiver. So, Maryland, 2 years ago, that was the last game, at Maryland, the last time Ohio State played a single-digit Big Ten game. It's a tricky place to go. This is probably a trickier offense with Mike Locksley and those skill players that Maryland's offense. So this is one that you have to be locked in for because as 2020 has proven, nothing can be taken for granted in this Big Ten East. And if you lose this one, you got yourself a real problem if you're Ohio State.
Oh, yeah.
And that Indiana game becomes even more urgent.
Yeah. Actually, we'll get in our predictions, bold predictions later in the week, as you well know.
Yeah,
but
we got 4 days before that.
I think Ohio State handles business on Saturday, to be honest with you. That's just my early gut call because I think they had a little bit of a wake up in the third quarter Saturday night. Just that this is such a wacky year. It is turning into a wacky season without a doubt. Northwestern with a Indiana transfer quarterback looks like the team to beat in the West. Indiana with an Indiana quarterback looks like the best challenger to Ohio State. You see where I'm going with all that?
Yeah.
And then Ohio State, like I said, they had that wacky third quarter and maybe early fourth, but they still win by 22 points. I got my points all wrong, when we were talking about how many. I said Ohio State got outscored 28-14 in the second half, and I kept forgetting the fact that Greg Schiano's two-point conversion schemer needs some work to do. Like I told you after that game, boy, they better hope they don't get to a third overtime game because they have no shot.
Yeah.
they if those are their 4 best 2-point conversion tries, wow. But here's what I wanted to ask you. Coming out of that game, who is a guy that you think should play more from what you saw in that game Saturday? Or is that guy already playing? You follow my drift. I mean, that's kind of a two-edged question there about Ohio State, but who is somebody on Ohio State that caught your eye in a good way?
It sounds like a broken record for this show and you and I's conversation, but Josh Proctor, and I think it wasn't so much what Josh Proctor did or didn't do in that game, but Marcus Hooker is missing a lot of tackles, and the thing that Jordan Fuller did so well was being that eraser. And if you look at that fake, direct snap where Rutgers sold the snap over the head, Marcus Hooker is, he had a chance to get him on the ground. I'm not saying it was an easy play for him or whatever. He was the guy where that if that had been Jordan Fuller, then that play would have been over. It would have been a first down and not, a 60-yard run to set up a touchdown. And, I think that's if we're looking at all of this stuff that happened in the second half, and if we're going to assign value to it, which is fair, what you've said, all of it is fair. I'm not arguing that point at all. Maybe that safety position is one where they've got to, try something else. And, Bryson Shaw put an absolute smackdown on one hit late in the game. We've seen Ronnie Hickman out there. Maybe it's not Josh Proctor. If they like what role he's in, maybe it's one of those other guys. We've seen Lathan Ransom playing some. Shaw now, Hickman, they've got experience. Maybe that's just a spot where Ohio State is still in flux. Hey,
wasn't it Proctor though that made the tackle at the end of that play?
He ran him down. Yep.
Exactly. I'm telling you. I mean, I on the 97.1 The Fan, the pregame show I do with Anthony Rothman and Jake Ballard every week. I thought Josh Proctor had a chance to be that guy that really shined on Saturday night. That was my guy. They called him my money man. And, but my point was he didn't have that really spectacular 2 interception game or something. But yeah, I watched the video too after I got home the other night, and he's shown in that game. I mean, in his own way, and they, like you said, they used him all over the field. I think that is something to take, especially when you have these memories of that game at Maryland 2 years ago when they let all those plays out of the gate, and you can't take into account Raheem Jarrett, that freshman, and the big plays they had at Penn State. You can't let the big plays out the gate. And I think you're exactly right. That you might see a little bit of a shakeup there. Offensively, Justin Fields, we're watching. Too bad this isn't a 12-game regular season with a championship game and then possibly 2 college football playoff games. Justin Fields is having a year. And a couple of passes he threw on Saturday night, we talked about it in our rapid reaction show right after the game. I'm telling you, he just looks like that poised veteran dude. He held the ball too long a couple of times on Saturday, and his offensive line wasn't the best against what Rutgers and Greg Schiano and them were dialing up all the time. But Ohio State rolled him away from that a lot, which was very smart, and he was very accurate on the move, in my opinion. We're really watching a special guy.
He's the best player in college football. I thought that before the year. I think that I would rather, if it were me drafting a team next spring, I would rather build around Justin Fields than Trevor Lawrence. Maybe that's because I watch Justin Fields every week and not Trevor Lawrence. The things I've seen him do, I don't think I've ever, even what Dwayne Haskins did 2 years ago, we thought, wow, never see anybody at Ohio State who will throw the football quite like that. Justin Fields is the best quarterback I have ever seen.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not exaggerating. It's not hyperbole. It's not because he's here right now. He does things that I've seen no quarterback do. And it's hard to even pick what throw was the most impressive to me on Saturday night, but the one rolling to the right, the Olave touchdown, I thought for sure from the press box, and I said this to you on Saturday night, that it was an interception.
Yeah.
It was on the money. It was the right touch. It was the right velocity. When Olave got there, the ball was just sitting in his hands, and that throw was insane.
Yeah. Well, the other touchdown to Olave was incredibly impressive also down the left side. I mean, and then, of course, the pass to Garrett Wilson over in the left corner. Wilson ran that little cut in and cut out, and in the back of the end zone, that ball was thrown so pure, it was crazy.
Yep.
I mean, I've been watching quarterbacks. Personally, I consider myself an aficionado, but others might not. But I'm telling you, this guy is as special as I've ever seen. I watched Joe Namath play at Alabama live, I mean, I've been watching quarterbacks for a long time, and Justin Fields is right up there. And what's amazing, before we go here, awesome, what's amazing is the last 2 games, he really hasn't run the ball, with any frequency, which is what a lot of people were worried about after the first game. They've still got that in their hip pocket, because and I know a couple of those zone reads, which weren't really zone reads, he just handed the ball off. If he'd kept the ball on a couple of those, he might have gone 30 before anybody touched him on Saturday night. And just because of the way the defense was flowing, because even Greg Schiano is smart enough to know they don't want their top quarterback to get hurt, So they've still got that when push comes to shove that they didn't have really against Wisconsin or Clemson last year in the championship game of the Big Ten and then the college football playoff. They still got that to go to if they need it, especially next week. But real quick before we go, I don't think what's going on at Maryland is a mirage, but you got to admit they've got a little bit of moxie going for them, momentum going into this week. What would be your primary concern as you early evaluate this game?
Just that Ohio State comes ready to defend the pass, and that they, if there was any complacency that sat in, that they shake that out quickly. I do think there is, like I said, I'm going to give credit to other programs this week just because I had a rough week evaluating Rutgers. But what I talked about with that Minnesota game, and then the fact that it clearly looks like Penn State has tapped out on this season, and they were already missing a number of players. I think there's a little bit element of fool's gold with Maryland, but they can certainly prove that wrong. They're going to feel good about themselves. They still beat Penn State. They're not going to say Penn State is 0-3 or lost their first 2 games. That's still a team, even with guys opting out, that was very talented. And to take it to them the way they did, they should feel good about that. Ohio State is a completely different animal, though, and the talent disparity between these two programs is massive. It would take a special effort for them to get it done. But they're going to probably take some element of what Rutgers did, trick plays, aggression on fourth down, throw everything you got at them and hope for the best, because that's all you can do against this Ohio State team that is so much better than everybody else in the league.
Yeah. And as Maryland showed against Minnesota, and it showed, basically taking the big lead against Penn State, but hanging on. But the bottom line is these are league games. I keep enforcing that with people. These are conference games. Most of the time in conference games, the opponent doesn't quit, doesn't roll over. And I think we saw that, a good example of that on Saturday night in Ohio Stadium. And Maryland, just seems to have a little bit of a kick to itself right now. And I don't expect Maryland to maybe get down in the first half and roll over in the second half. I really expect them to fight. From what I've seen of them in two of the three games they played so far this year. And so that's what stands out to me. These are 4-quarter games, and I think Ohio State has gotten that message.
Yep.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's Awesome Ward. I'm Tim May. This is another version of the Tim May podcast. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back next week to kind of chop up things from Ohio State coming out of that game with Maryland, and looking forward to its showdown game. But until then, this is Tim May for Awesome Ward. We'll see you then.